Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to switch to my document camera. And I'll do some demoing. Okay, I'm going to spotlight myself. I've got a fairly new computer. I'm just not used to using the document camera with it. So I think I've got it all down now, though. And I do want to mention that we will have a drawing at the end of this session. I'll bring the little books over that we'll have available. So you don't have to be here in person, but if you are watching via recording, etc., you do need to respond within a week. If you never watch the program, we're not gonna make the effort and spend the postage to mail this out. So it's a members drawing, and they're books that Veronica Phillips has made, and they've got her lovely press and release Romans. She's written quotes, etc., inside of the books. And we hope to do a drawing of those each time we have a session, Romans session. Okay, so with that, let me focus. And let me zoom in a little, I think, or I can just lower this. Nope. I need to zoom in. And I'll just move this over here. Okay. So I sent handouts. I'm going to get mine out. Sorry for reaching across. Mine's kind of scribbled up. I make notes to myself. I want to just mention a few things. And let me zoom out just for this. So this is the proportions, general proportions. Yours, I've added some headings and all. This is an older version. And I've been noticing, so I recommend Sheila Waters' Foundations for Calligraphy. Let me pick mine up. And I just noticed, because I used another book when I created these, I noticed that Sheila's does hers differently. So what I want to mention is that you will see Romans done so many different ways. And I want to suggest that you decide what you like. The way I always learned was for the narrow letters, we used a full half square. But then I was reading a book on which Sue Houghton, who she's been involved with the St. John Bible. She's a very well-respected calligrapher in the UK. She did these, so they used up just part of the square. They started over 1/8, or actually this would be, I suppose, yeah, 1/8. They started over, and that I've got that on your handout. But then I looked at some of these that Sheila has, and her F's and E's are a full quarter of the space narrower. And I kind of like that. I had never seen that before. Well, let's just say I didn't notice. I've had this book forever and I never noticed that. So I like the narrow caps, and I'm going to experiment with those. So I suggest you look at different references and just choose what works for you. And when I show spacing, some of the tips I have are based on the full square. And I didn't think it would make that much difference when these are a little bit narrower, but I will talk about how you can vary that. Right, so this is Sheila's book. After this session, when I send the recording, I'm going to send out a list I've started of recommended books. Sheila's is one. I talk about, and what I really like is I used Sheila's for the spacing. She has samples with every letter and different combinations of letters. Here's every letter. Annie Sacali has a somewhat different way of going about it. And I had always had Sheila's book, but I had never understood that completely. Sorry, there's a chat, somebody asking a question. Oh, so the paper, I'm just using John Neal's calligraphy practice pad. And when I mentioned this, on the supply list, I put graph paper. And so this one is the graph paper with 8. It shows more details. When I first did my handouts, I did it on graph paper that had 4. So just use whatever you've got. Right, I'm gonna close this chat. And Caroline, if you come to the room, I've let a few people in, but okay. And then the other book I found more recently is this book, and it looks like a kid's book to look at the cover. I think I just got this, and I think when people we have sales of used books and all at different events. And I looked through it and I saw that the consultant was Sue Houghton, and I'm well aware of her being on Donald Jackson's team for the St. John Bible. And I know she knows what she's doing. So I looked at this, and that's where I first noticed the letters a little narrower. And as I mentioned, I just noticed that Sheila's are even more narrow than Susan Houghton. So I have those all on the list of recommended references that I'll send out to you. And I'm going to walk through these now. Sorry, I dropped my. So proportions, we're going to go through proportions, and then we're going to move on to spacing. And I've got this sheet, the new sheet I just created, that has got some tips for spacing also. All right, so we're starting with the squares, the full square letters. And Caroline, just one more thing. If there's any questions that are in the chat that you think need to be asked right away, please just go ahead, Caroline, and let me know. I'm not going to be checking the chat.
Will do, thanks.
So I'm doing I did an O before we started, so I'm just going to go through how I do that. So an O takes up a full square. Some people can just draw and they'll be fine. I sometimes put a dot halfway on each side, and you can do it kind of sketchy. What I did before I started, I took a scratch piece of paper, and I did some circles to kind of get my hand going in that direction. And the first one I did actually turned out pretty good, but then I had to fiddle with it. And so you can do sketchy. And if you look at sometimes I find sketchy to be easier than just drawing. It just depends, especially because you can correct. So I'm thinking this is a little lumpy. I can go in and correct that with sketchy. And if you look at, start at sketchy, and then you can darken it and get it at the way you want it. But if you look at this with the 8, you can see here's the square. And you can see that the rounded edges here at the corner are shy of the first square. So that's what I'm looking at when I'm doing the sketchy, just making sure they don't come all the way to the first square. And this is practice on the grid sheet, but later we can move to not on a grid sheet. When you're doing most of your work, you're not going to have a grid sheet, but this is to help you get the shapes right. And you can fool with that till it's right. You can imagine how many times I had to fool with these to get them into nice circles. But it's practice. A lot of us, we're doing so many different hands. We get out of practice of doing Romans or italic or whatever else we're doing. So it just takes warm up. And I did a little warm up before this, but actually my O's were looking better earlier. So I do it real sketchy, and then once I'm happy enough with it, I'll just darken it in. And if I wanted to do this with pen, then I'd go in and darken it with pen. And after I've done a few of these, I won't need to do the sketchy. You know, once I'm warmed up, I won't need to be so sketchy. Okay, so then the difference, and feel free if you have any questions, just unmute and ask your questions. And then the Q, it's the same as the O. Just go in here. I bring it up about a half a square, and it comes out past or just to the edge. So then I just draw that line. Okay, and C, I'm going to do C right here. I'm going to sketch in a little line. And C is 7/8. So what I'll do with a C is, again, I'm going to do halfway. It's 7/8, but I'll do half of a full square. And I'm just going to draw that in. But when you get to the edges, I'm not coming up too far. I flatten it out slightly. Okay, so there's the C. And a G, G is the same thing. So if it were a full circle, this would be the edge, but it's 7/8. So I stopped it here. And a G comes up just below half and then just come over. And these are very simple Romans, and I should call them skeleton Romans. And I got out some pencils that I could even start doing press and release if I wanted to. I'm not really at that point in when I'm demoing, but I could get in here. I could do press, light, press. Okay, and then this is a D. It's also 7/8. So I'm going to go over here. This would be a full square here. Let's make sure. No, this would be the full square here. I'm going to do it just a little bit shy because it is 7/8. I'm going to put a dot. And the other thing is with a D, it's usually slightly, you don't want any extra weight on the bottom. So it's either, some of these Ds you'll look at are exactly even. Some classes I've taken, we put the high point a little bit over half. So again, this varies. And I think I'll do it a little over half. And I'm gonna just get in here. I'm gonna come over. And then I'm gonna bring it down. And then I'm gonna start bringing it in. And this one, I'm gonna have to be very sketchy and clean this up. Okay. So, and the one on here, I've even brought it a little less. That it's not, you can see it curves in a little. And that's one style. You don't see that all the time. But whatever reference I use when I created this, that's what they did. And I'm doing a little bit of press and release, which means on the curve I press. And then I press at the end. Okay. We're just getting the proportions. If we were doing this with pen, we'd be following a ductus. But since we're doing this with pencil, we're not worried about that at this point. Okay, any questions on these that are showing within a full square? They're either 1 inch or I should say 1 full square or 7/8 of a square. All right, then the next row, these are 3/4 of a square. And I'm going to quickly go through these. And you will see some other books where some of these that are 3/4 or 7/8, you may see some of those. Sometimes shortcuts are taken and they're all 3/4, but what you'll see most of the time is 7/8. And then we'll do 3/4. So I'm doing this here. And then 3/4 of a square. And then the crossbar on the H is just above half. That's a very wide letter. And so once we get into using these in pieces, you may vary some of this, but the formal Romans 3/4. And A is 3/4 also, and I am going to sketch in my line. And what you do is, here's your center, top center. I put a dot there. Let me see, do I have a light on this? I'm going to turn on a light. I don't know if that helps or not. Probably not. Okay, but the bottom legs come just outside that 3/4 border. So I'm just going to bring this down. Down. And one thing I just always remember learning this from Jane Shibata, I'm looking at where I'm going. I'm not watching the point of that pencil. I'm up here and I'm looking at this point and I'm just aiming for that. Same here, start here, aim for that point. Helps you to get meet at the right place. And while the H was just above the center line, the A, the crossbar is more, probably about a square down, about a quarter, 1/8 of a square down from where the H is. And then the V is 3/4 also, and it's just done the opposite of the A without the crossbar. So here's my middle point, and just outside the line. And now I am just, let's see if I can do this so I'm not blocking the view. I am just aiming towards that. And here I'm aiming towards that. I'm looking at that point that I want to meet. N. N is again 3/4. I'm going to do both of the side. And then I want to go from here to here. So let me just turn this so I can make sure you can see what I'm doing. I'm looking at this point. I'm coming from here. So when you write, you're not going to want to tilt your paper like this, but this is just so that you can see. And then
Kristi,
yes.
excuse me.
Mhm.
Someone asked, what pencil are you using for effective press and release?
Okay, I just am using on this one an HB, and that is not what I would use if I were making an effort to use really press and release. I would use something a little softer, maybe a 2B or a 4B. Veronica Phillips, who I love her press and release, she uses a Blackwing. I'm trying to
And would
think
that
of
be
it.
the Blackwing, the black?
Yeah, or she's got a favorite, Palomino, is it called, I think? I think that's her favorite. So that a softer pencil, HB is not very soft, but as you can see, it's actually working. So this is actually okay. But if I had picked this particularly for press and release, I would have picked a softer one.
Thank you. I
Right.
hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Okay, now the T, I'm just putting, taking off 1/4 of an inch, just making myself some guidelines for practice and for showing you. And people do this differently. Some do the crossbar first and then the vertical. For what we're doing, it's not that critical. Everyone has their own preference. I've heard the right way is to do the crossbar first, because then you can see where the center is. We're on graph paper. We can see where the center is, but many find it helpful to do the crossbar first. And then quickly the U. That's 3/4, very straight sides. Come around to the center, come up, and then I'm just going to come back down and meet it. Right? And there's another few characters that are 3/4. Here's the X. And again, you look at Sheila's book, I think she might actually have it narrower. Let me check on her book. Yeah, she's got it as a half. So, and the other thing I noticed is I made the K narrow like the other letters, but I'm looking and a lot of these are full. They take up the full half square. So, and I have even seen some 3/4 Ks. So I think for my own exemplar, I'm probably going to widen this and make it a full 1/2 inch. But the X, I think I see it more often as a 3/4, but I really respect Sheila's work. And so I think we choose what we want to do. And let me see what Sue Hupton's doing with her X. I think I used hers as a reference for what I was doing. Yeah, she's got the 3/4. So experiment, do what you want to do, but I'm going to show the X as the 3/4. And the thing is, you always want the bottom to be wider than the top. And the way I learned it is I start the top just inside my outer border, which those aren't going to be drawn on a real piece, but you can imagine them. And then the bottom are just outside. So I'm going to go right here. Let me turn this so you can see. And I'm aiming towards this bottom. And then here, aiming towards that bottom. So what your goal is, you want to be a little over halfway with your cross. So that is barely over. There's the crossbar. It's just under that crossing. And if you look on here, pretty 1, 2, 3, yeah, pretty much the same. Just barely above the halfway point. You don't ever want it to be below the halfway point. And this one I think is a little wide on the bottom. Maybe I didn't need to go quite, I was actually aiming to be barely outside that bottom line. So that's something to take into account. Okay, why? Again, I'll just, for purposes of demo, here's my 3/4 border. And I am going to bring this top, I can call it a cup, a vessel. I'm gonna make that come just below the halfway point. And again, I'll twist this so you can see I'm starting on this one. I'm starting just outside the lines, just barely outside those 3/4 borders. And I'm looking at that center line. So if I'm doing Romans on a more, something I want to have a better piece, I will draw that little dot. I'm not going to draw normally these lines here, but I will draw the little dots because they're going to be covered. And then here we go with the bottom stem. Always make sure that you come below the halfway point on that. Otherwise, the proportions are not going to look right. And then Z. And we're making pretty good time. But I do want to pick up the pace a little so I can get through everything. Z. It's also another 3/4 line or letter. And I come inside the line to start. And on the bottom, I'm going to be just outside the line. That's a real common theme in the letters. They're just slightly smaller on the top. So here I go. I'm drawing this and I'm aiming towards that end. And then I come down towards this line. And then I come over to this one, just outside. So it's barely bigger, but it's not going to have a lopsided look. One way it's been explained to me is you don't want it to look like it's going to fall over. If this came out too far, it might look like the letter was out of balance. Okay. Any questions? Those are all the 3/4 letters. Okay, and I'm going to do an M, and I will do it right here. The M, the way I learned it, and you will see some slight variations on this, but I start inside, and I'm not barely inside, I'm slightly, let me draw the line. Here's your square. I'm going to draw it darker so you can see it. Those are just imaginary lines normally, but I just want to show it so you can see the structure. I am not exactly right inside of it, but not far. And you can look at the handout. And then on the outside, though, I am just a little bit outside also. And the center, the bottom will be right in the center. So here I go. I'm aiming towards that edge. And if it helps you, you can do this in the air before you actually do it. And it threw me off having that dark line, but I wanted you to see where that was. And maybe just for demo now, I should just erase that a little. And then I'm going to aim for this line. And then I'm going to aim for the center. So there's your M. So M, these are the wider letters. The two wider letters are M and W, and the W is the widest. So I am going to do a W right now. I'm just gonna pencil this in, not so dark this time, just to show you where the edge of my square is. And this, the W, for this version, you come out a full eighth of a square over. And do I need to zoom in a little so you can see this a little more? I'm an eighth over. And then on the bottom, I'm an eighth inside. And then I'm right in the center. So here we go. I'm aiming for that bottom dot. And now I'm aiming for this from the center to that same meet up. Maybe I should make that a little darker. And then I'm aiming for this spot. And I always put those dots, somebody else might not need those dots, but I always give myself a little dot just to give me a place to go. But I'm sure there are many like Sheila Waters, etc., that did not, or Julian Waters, that did not draw dots there. They've been doing this so much, they don't need to. Okay, but there's your W, it's the widest letter. Okay, I want to have time for spacing and sharing work at the end and our drawing. So I'm going to move quickly through these narrow letters. So I speaks for itself, just a straight line. J is a straight line. And then come down. This is the J I'm showing. You'll see other J's where they come around further and maybe not quite that far because we do have narrower letters we're doing, but they do come over that way. I prefer this one. That's just a personal preference. I think when I was first learning, I learned a more one that came out further. Okay, and then L, just come down. And because the one I'm showing is a little narrower than half, you could do one, the way I first learned it came half. But I really like the one that Sue does. So I'm not coming the full half. Just an eighth less than a half. And I want to show Sheila's, compare Sheila's and Sue's. So here's Sheila's, and it is just an eighth narrower, eighth of a space narrower. And then Sue's, let's see, where is hers? And here's hers, an eighth of a square also. So they were the same. Sue and Sheila were the same on the L, but it's when you get to the F and the E that Sheila got narrower. I just find this very fascinating to examine these, analyze them, and I never looked at these quite so carefully before I started preparing these handouts. So I just want to encourage you to look at samples. Most of us have books, libraries have books, different handouts. It's just very interesting to see the different ways these are done. Okay, and E, so here's the E. And maybe I'll do it over just to match the handout. Let me draw a little square guidelines here to match what's on the handout. And then I'm going to draw this one 1/8 of an inch over. And then if I followed Sheila's, she starts 1/8 of an inch over on this side. Sue doesn't, she goes all the way to the edge. So I just thought, and the handout goes all the way to the edge. So do whichever one you wish to do. And that crossbar on the E is just on top of the center line. And I just discovered that Sheila's were narrower, so I am going to experiment and decide which I want to use on mine. I've been doing this one. It's just a little bit wider, but it's not a full half square. I'm going to experiment and see. I don't know, maybe the one that Sheila does will look too narrow for me, but I figure if it works for Sheila, it's probably wonderful. But then again, anything Sue Houghton does is wonderful also. So F, that's another 1/2 inch. I'm just drawing the little guidelines to show, or I'm saying 1/2 inch, but if you're on a different height, just half a square. So here's the F. And then I'll do it the way Sue did it, coming all the way over to the border. And then with the F, the crossbar is below the center. And the reason for that is if it were high, we're told that it looks top heavy. So it comes down a little lower. And then the K, I'm going to make the K wider than on this handout. As I mentioned, I'm actually going to change this handout because I noticed that I think both Sheila and Sue make theirs a little wider. So here's the K, and I think both Sheila and Sue used the 1/2 inch, but other teachers I've studied with have used occasionally 3/4 inch. I like the narrower, but I'm going to look through all my handouts and pick out the ones that have a wider, just to share that for reference. So I'm going to start the K over here, and then the top of the K starts just inside the 1/2, and it's going to come just inside here. My favorites are don't hit that line there. They stop just short of it. Those are ones I like the best. And then the bottom comes just outside. So here we go. And here we go. And as you can see, I'm using paper towels as my padding for this paper. Okay, and then P. Again, I'm taking a drawing guidelines just to demo for you. And this one starts 1/8 of an inch over. And then I'm going to draw a little line over here, a little dot, I should say. And this one starts here, just a little bit down. I was taught it starts right up at that top bar, but I think it's Sue I saw started just below. So I'm starting just below. I'm going to do this lightly to get the shape. And then this is going to come just below halfway. It's going to end just below. So here we go. And then B is the same thing. Except that on this one, the top bowl is just above halfway. You'll see other versions that are exactly half. The top and the bottom are exactly the same, but this one that I used as a model is above halfway, and I like that model. So I just make myself a little mark, and I make a little mark here, and then I'll want a mark here. And again, it starts just below that line, comes over, then I want to meet this. And then I'm going to come over. So when I did this little line, I came a little too far. Okay, so I'm going to darken this now. And the other, so this top one just comes right to the line and the bottom one right outside. That's this model. The way I learned it, they were exactly the same, but I'm showing this model that I liked. And then R. And here's some guidelines. I'm going to do the R. And then on the R, it's like the P, it comes a little below, it ends. We're going to want this to, this one a little bit outside the guideline, not much. And what I've noticed is if it's a little below the center line, it comes a little outside. That makes it more even. So here we go. I'm just darkening it. And then the way you determine this slant is what I've read is you go to this corner, but in practicality, because a broad edge pen letter would take up more space, it actually comes a little bit below. So if I take a ruler and look at it this way, it's actually quite a bit below. So you will hear books telling you that they need to match there, but when I actually put a ruler on it, they didn't actually match. So I come to about here. This is going to come just outside. There, I'm aiming for that. And if I aimed for this, this would start way out and it just doesn't look good. And this needs to be refined. It's a little bit ugly. And this bottom, since this comes just outside, I should have this bottom leg come out a little bit further. And I actually don't like how that looks on the top. So if I were playing around, I brought it a little too far out. So that's why we're doing our warm up and practice. Okay. And then the last letter. And of these, let's see. So here I'm doing the guidelines for the demo. And this one does not, it's not any smaller than the half. It takes up the full half. But what they do with this one is you've got this circle It's just, I find it easier to review. And you come around, just follow that circle around. And a lot of times, this one shows it coming up all the way up to this corner. A lot of times I'll flatten that out a little. So play with it. I kind of do like how it looks when it, in the drawing, comes up to this bottom 8th square. And this one comes over about halfway down. A lot of times I do flatten these out, but I'm copying the one in here. It does not come way down here on the top. Any questions? We've got about 15 minutes left and I want to get through the spacing. All right, so this is the handout and that's the one I've been showing that I did the spacing in here based on what I learned from Sheila Waters and Annie Sacali. And so this is your, well, Sheila would just color in part of the letters. I just put a rectangle there to just show where your visual space stops. And what we're aiming for is to have equal visual space between the letters. And if we had just 2 straight lines, that would be so easy. But then when you put a circle in here, an O, a curve in here, a curved letter, if you put it too close, you don't have enough space. But if you put it this far, you would have all this extra space added on. So if I were to do this, let me do one here just to demo. If I were to have this one only come to here, look how much extra space there is in there. So we have to move it closer. And that's where this visual spacing comes in. That we want this, I've got these bars in here and they should be equal amounts. This, I'm not actually, these aren't spaced, but when you do the spacing, the next handout will do the actual spacing. This is what you're going to look at. You want this to be half a letter. All right, so let me talk more about these. Here's your O. You're going to have this space in here will be part of your visual. So that cuts off this edge of the circle for how close you're going to go. And this will be more clear when we get to the next spot. But, and then see here, it cuts off this much, but because this is open, it cuts off this much. And for those of you that have Sheila's book, she's showing them, she's got her little lines. She's got drawing these, like this. She's drawing what you're seeing, and she's got these lines. And mine are based on the lines that she came up with. I found this took me quite a while to figure out, and it was with Annie Sacali and Sheila Waters' books together. I was able to figure this out. And so I tried to make it more straightforward with just these rectangles. So when you have an A, the lines actually come to where the crossbar matches. You've got this space up here that we're balancing out. On the V, same amount of space. And you've got straight sides, so it's going to be that the line, the space comes right up to the lines. A T, you just have a little bit, because you have a crossbar. If it were an I, there's no margin. You start right there with your spacing. But because a T has a crossbar that's taking some visual space, you have a slight amount of margin there. And the U, because you've got this curve in here that will add space, counter space, that line is slightly inside the sides of the U. It's not, it may be straight sides on the top, but it's not straight on the bottom. So that compensates. And the L, that's because of the crossbar, it's a little bit margin inside. Any questions on this? And I'll show you how you use that. So what I used to do for years and years and years, I used to just write out my Roman word, and then I'd think, well, are those even? I'd color them in. I wasn't necessarily sure. Here's a sheet I did where I colored in between the lines. And I would always not be absolutely sure that those were even. And that's the way I would do it. I would just play around with it and never be completely sure. Then I took a class just about few years ago, and maybe a couple years ago, I took another class that made it even clearer to me. So I took a class with Jurgen Verkemst from Belgium, and he taught about the spacing in between the letters. And there's just I'm drawing the line here. After you've done this a while, you can do it to practice, draw the line, but it's just an imaginary line. And when I'm doing these now, I will just put a little tick up here. If I want some, if I want some kind of help, I'll put a little tick up here to know that's where I want that letter to end. So that was Jurgen. I learned the spacing in between. And then later I took a class with Susie Behringer, and she taught about using the same techniques to get the proportions of the letters. So she taught that. I don't think she taught using the spacing. I don't think that was part of the class, but then I had learned this with Jurgen, and Susie attributed this to Peter Thornton. She learned it from Peter Thornton. I took, I think Romans with Peter. I don't think we did this. We were doing more variations on Romans. I don't remember learning this with him, but once Susie explained it, she made it so clear. So I'm going to go through that right now. And I did, when Margaret and I were on the phone, I was making myself a little helper. So I'm going to just show that. So if I'm not on this grid paper is perfect for practicing, but if I'm not on it and I don't have all those grids, I want something to help me. Let me get in here with focusing. So I'm going to do what Susie taught, and I'm going to use the 45-degree angle to get a square. And after I've practiced this a while, I can pretty much eyeball that. But I found myself today, I didn't have a full square, so I made myself this little template. And the way you get a 45-degree angle is you create a square and you run from one corner to another. And that's your 45-degree angle. So what I'm doing here is I'm using this technique to get the width for an O. So I do my first guideline. I want a full square. I just do a 45-degree angle coming up, and where that ends is the end of a full square. So then I can do the O, and I do my little halfway dots. Okay, so there's my O. I don't have my grid, but I'm figuring this out using these 45 degrees. And the difference is if I were on a 7/8 letter, so let's say I want to do C now. And I'm not going to draw all these lines when I'm writing these, but I'm doing this to show you. I want this to be 7/8, so I am going to figure out 1/8 up. And I'm going to do my 45-degree angle from there. And then that should end at 7/8. So I start up 1/8, and I'm showing that here. So my G, and I'm just going to put and my halfway would be where I do my little helpers, my little dots to help me. And the top of the G is based on the whole square. So I have my dot here, dot here, dot here, dot here. Okay, I'm coming around. I stop at the 1/8 where I figured out. Any questions on that? It may take a little while on this, but because I'd already had the class with Jürgen when Susie showed this, I just thought that was the greatest thing. I suddenly was not so unsure about my spacing. Now I feel I've got the spacing. And so what we're coming up with is optical spacing. I consider this kind of a mechanical thing to help me get the correct optical spacing. Here's the optical spacing. I use, well, right now I'm doing proportions, but I'm using these lines as a just mechanical scientific thing. It's a math thing to get the right proportions, and then spacing too. And the thing about the L, so an L it'd be a 1/2 inch, but because we make this slightly less than 1/2 inch, I'm gonna do this 1/2 inch just to start. I think it's close enough. Okay, so there's my L. Again, you're going to be doing this in your head. I might do little tick marks up here. That's what I have found myself doing, but when I'm doing a piece, I'm not drawing these lines. If I were doing a pen piece, I could draw light lines if I wanted to, but if I'm doing pencil lettering, it's not going to work to draw those guidelines in. It'd be too hard to erase them and still not touch the letter. So I'm going to do this L. It's an 1/8 of a space in. And then I do the bottom. So I use that 1/2 square here. But if I were just doing this for an L in spacing, well, I'll get to that. Right now it's just proportions. So I do that 1/2 inch to get that proportion. I probably should show that red coming all the way down for the proportions. Okay, for the 3/4 inch, I'm going to do an H. And then an 1/8 or 3/4, I figure out where 3/4 is, do a 45-degree angle, and there's the edge of the 3/4. And I do the H, I do the and then right above the crossbar, right above half, I do the crossbar. So I'm getting that. Is this clear how I'm using these to get the shape? For a full square, I start from corner to corner, but if it's 3/4, I'm starting up a quarter and it still ends up at the line. If I'm doing a 7/8, I start up 1/8 and it gives me the full square that I need. Not the full square, but the full shape that I need. And half, if it's a half letter, I use the half, start at half. Okay, with that, I'm gonna just quickly go into the spacing. So that's where, here's the spacing down here. And these are these rectangles from this handout that I gave you that show the inner space, the inner visual space. So what I do, and I'm going to draw this here. Here's my O. I've got my little 1/4 inch.
We can't see.
Oh, sorry. I've got my 1/4 inch. I make my O. And then normally I would be doing this just maybe a little tick mark here, but just to show you, here's my visual space as it's shown on the handout. I would just do a little tick mark. That's what I found myself doing when I'm actually writing a word. And then if I were doing another round, so I'm then going to do, these letters are half a space apart. That is, that's what's used here, half a space apart. If you did a full space apart, these would really be spaced far apart. So that wouldn't be the normal. Half a space is really what appears to be the ideal spacing. So to get that spacing, you start at half and you use your 45-degree angle. And I'm not going to use my little helper now. I'm just going to start at half right here at the edge of that visual spacing. And I'm going to go up 45 degrees. And so I would just, I would do an imaginary line, but probably put a little tick mark up there. And if it's another round, then I've got to take into account, this is visual spacing. So I wouldn't just start the O right here. I need to start it, my visual spacing is here. I need to start the O here. And then here's your spacing you're going to have between the two letters. And so if you're doing an A, you would do your 1/2 inch here, and you would start at the visual left boundary. And I wrote instructions on how this is done, and I put for each one on the top, and I didn't explain each detail on the bottom. It should become clear on how those are done. This starts up a 1/4. This one I showed, it starts up a 1/2. This started 7/8. So they're all marked here. And for these wide letters, I just worked on the square. and you just come outside of the square. Okay, so that's proportions. And then you look at your visual spacing. At first, when I was doing this, I was always referring to Sheila's book. Now I refer to this just to help me get the visual spacing right. I just find this so much easier than just, if I can think about this, I find it much easier than just guessing where I need to put the next letters. This gets easier with practice, but because we're doing so many different hands, I found this sheet to be a great helper. Okay. And let me just do one more. So here would be the visual edge of this letter. And then I do a 1/2 inch. There's my 45-degree angle. Here's the visual edge of this letter. Well, if you look at this S, you can see where the visual center is. And also that S is going to be a 1/2 inch wide. So the actual letter will start here. Here's my 1/2 inch wide. And I know this can get, I think when you've been doing Romans a while, this is more clear. If you're just starting, this is probably very confusing. But anyway, here is my visual. And there is my width of my letter. Questions? This one, I would say, play with this a while. Try writing out the Romans or something else. You've got this sample here or another word you want to write out. Try writing it out and playing around with these techniques. And I'm going to add more later. So I just, this was a start. I've been saying for quite a while, I wanted to do a handout on this. I've never seen a handout on these techniques. They've only been shown to me. There may be handouts out there. I didn't even know about this till the past few years. But the other thing that I learned from Jürgen was, if I want to do narrow letters, let's say this is an O. Let's say I want to do 1/2 the width. I'm going to just do some narrow letters. Well, then instead of starting at a 1/2 inch spacing, because they're narrow, I'm going to start at 1/4. So my next letter would start at 1/4. If I started that, there's an I. If I started that at a 1/2 inch, they'd be way too far apart because they're narrower letters. And in fact, I didn't do that quite right because there still is some visual spacing in that H. I should have done it from there. And then the I would go there. So this, I think, it takes some thought, but it's something that can be I found very, very helpful. And if you have any questions about this, this is my first draft on this handout. I would welcome any questions that I might need to clarify on here. So I think we're about out of time for that. And now we can have questions. And please feel free to unmute and ask questions. I have shown these techniques in the past, but I didn't have this handout. So I hope you find it helpful. Any questions?
I have a question from Barbara Close's Roman workshop that she did. And it's the change
her
the way the
program.
people, yeah, change the way the people and things. And I've got it.
Let
You know,
me let me spotlight you.
Okay. So it said like there's no spacing between the words.
Yeah, for that exercise.
Yeah. So does it have to, would the same have to fit right across? Or if I miss, like, do I have to go and change again? Like just shift things over?
Well, I'm showing you how to do spacing.
Yeah,
And I do see spacing between your IE right before think, you do have some extra spacing in
okay.
there. So
Yep,
if you look at that T
yep,
and that H and then that
yes,
H and that I,
yep,
those are not optically spaced.
no,
So this is just, to me, this really helped me because I would just look at this stuff and I
yes,
would have seen right away those weren't optically
yeah,
spaced. But you know, this was a quick exercise. We
yeah,
weren't working on all that.
no,
But this technique I just showed really helped
yes,
me that I could be sure I had things.
yeah,
So you could do this again
yep,
and use this in here. And I
yes, what I'm
think that would
thinking.
be really fun to do that.
Yeah.
I might have to try that too. And
I
Barbara's
don't
class, I
know.
think her lesson is still out there. We haven't taken it down yet. So
Okay,
I'm kind of thinking I might just go out there and watch that again and do that exercise
yeah.
again.
I've got it almost there. Then you're right. There's just a little tweaking,
Yeah,
but
like though, when you have those two straight lines, those need to be a half a space apart. If two straight lines, half a space apart. If they've got curves in there, they'll be closer. And that's where this visual
yeah.
spacing comes in. Let me just get this.
Yeah, I was trying to squeak the W in at the end there.
Yeah, and that was that was Barbara teaching for an hour and we did
Yeah,
those exercises. So we were all in a rush, but it would be great to go back and spend time. And when we take Barbara's class, I think we'll have more time. I mean, for those who are going to take her class, there'll be a week between lessons and we'll really have time to focus on those. But if you do, you know, an I, and then you do an H, you want to have that full half inch in there.
yeah.
And then let's say I'm doing a U. I
Hmm.
again want that full, well, not the full, because it was slightly, that bottom gave you a
Yes.
little
Sorry to interrupt,
less.
Kristi. Are you demoing?
Sorry,
No, thank you.
sorry. I'm I've zoomed in and so I have to. Okay, but you see how wide apart those are? But I forget the purpose of Barbara's exercise
Yeah,
right now. That was pre-summertime. Oh, it was the
yeah,
beginning of June.
yes,
So as I said, let's go in and watch that again and play with that with spacing in mind.
yeah. Because I think she just was trying to get us to do the Romans per the form
I
that
think
she
you're right. I don't think space,
suggested.
yeah.
No,
She didn't
and
have time to be
no,
educating us on spacing,
no.
but now that could be really fun now that you brought that up.
Yeah, just to like I'm almost there. I just need to figure out whether
Yeah,
it all fit or not.
yeah, and I did that. I gotta find it. I started it. I've got to find it, and I'm gonna play with that. You brought that up. We'll all get a head start on her Romans class.
Well, good, because I was trying to figure out what the heck, what's it supposed to look like? She never showed us hers.
Well, she was in such a rush, but I think I saw pictures that she gave me for the publicity for her
Yes.
class.
Yep.
Some of them may be in there. You do like color in between the letters. So you'll do that and then you'll do color in between the letters. So you'll want to have, that's when the spacing will really show up,
Yeah.
when you have the
Yeah.
different colors.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But at least, okay. So to me, it was an exercise to make sure you get your Romans done per proportion that they're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's what that class was. So,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
we'll be
Oh, good.
doing more when, that was a 1 hour thing. And
Yeah.
so when she teaches 8 sessions, we're going to really get a lot more in that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't
And
know. Thank you, because that helps solve like,
yeah,
what am I doing wrong? But I don't think that was.
yeah,
Thank
you
you.
were doing the exercise. It's just we're now looking beyond that. So
Yeah.
any other questions?
Thanks, Kristi.
Huh? And I invite any of you, if you try this, as I said, this could be confusing if you're not experienced with playing with Romans. And I welcome any questions. You can always email me and I'm happy to send a little demo or a little sample. It's good
Kristi,
for
thank-
me. Excuse me?
No, I just was gonna, so this is what you're calling optical spacing. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand what that means. So that means the sort of way that you would space, okay.
Well, when I do this, to
So,
me, this is mechanical, but
mhm,
it's based on these, which are optical. And so optical means you're looking at them and you want them to look like, if you had just all straight, it could be a picket fence and it'd be exactly even. But
mhm,
when you get a curve in there, you have to move it closer. Or if you get an angle in there, that's
mhm,
got to take up less space. So see, you've got this space now. So you want this space to appear to be the same amount of space as this. That's what gives you a pleasing look. And
okay.
so the optical spacing is what's on here. I got this from the lesson from Sheila. And here is the optical spacing. She's worked it out for us. Where years ago, I just would look at letters and try to make them look like the space, and I'd have to rewrite the word many times. But this helps.
Mhm,
Sheila pointing that out helps, but I still was never sure if I was right. And then once I learned this mechanical way of figuring out how to move from one space to another, it just made me sure. I can find these optical spaces. I can easily find that close enough. And then putting the 1/2 inch in there just made it, for me, very, very doable.
mhm. So it's there's sort of there's an agreed way that these letters look best if they're spaced, because it's sort of too, it's also, it seems like you're trying to get the spacing even as well
Yeah,
somehow.
that's what the
Yeah.
optical spacing is. You're going for spacing that looks even. And
Mhm,
as we said, an I, straight letters. So the way I learned it, I was just told straight letters should be farther apart, curves should be closer. Well, that was kind of vague. And then with Sheila's, and then that 1/2 inch, because I don't think I ever knew it should be a 1/2 space in between the Romans either as the ideal. I don't think I learned that either until I took the class with Jürgen.
mhm.
He learned it from Peter Thornton. So it's now being passed to us. I had not learned that before I studied with Jürgen. And
No,
then with Susie, took it, used it for the proportions.
Yeah, Kristi, I can really agree with you with the Jurgen's workshop. That's where all of a sudden I went, oh, okay. And I could then see it. It took me, I couldn't see the spacing. I'd say, oh, is it? Oh, I don't know. Is it the same size? Oh, I could never work that out. But once I started with the mechanical, all of a sudden it became easier, a lot easier to see that space.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and so I don't want to overwhelm people that are new, but also I wish I had learned this so long ago because I just was never sure. So any other questions? Anyone have anything they want to share that they've done? I'm going to just put myself on I'm going to turn off this and put myself on there. Anything anybody wants to share? But thank you, Susan. You've always bring up such great stuff, and I really want to get that out because I'm sure we will be doing that in that class. And Barbara's class is January, February. So
I did do a whole envelope design that went to Margaret with Romans. They were Barbara's Romans. And
I
it
can,
worked, it worked out really well. I'm just waiting for her to get it.
so when you submitted your birthday card design, I knew right away it was you, even though there were no names on it. And I thought, I wanted that one to win. Because we're doing all these Romans. I
I
love
know.
that. But people picked the other one you did.
Well, that one might just circulate to certain special people because
Yeah, I just love that.
yeah, no, it probably will come your way.
Oh, good. Thank you. So, any other questions? So what I'd love to see is if any of you do any of this. So we have our Facebook group. I'll send the link to that, and anyone who's in the Facebook group can post in there. The reason I don't do Padlet in this is because actually, I don't know why I don't do Padlet, but we started with Facebook and that's what we're doing. Eventually, we may switch to Padlet. But if somebody's not in Facebook and would like to join, you can just send me a request and we can add you. But I'll put the information in the email with the recording. And I hope the recording is working. It's just not, yeah, it says it's
showing
recording.
up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent. No,
Okay.
it's, yeah, thank you for starting us out again for this year. I think it's fantastic.
And so we'll figure out what we'll be doing next session. We had a request for Built Up Romans as a focus point, but I thought we're having Beth Lee doing a whole month of Built Up Romans, so I'm not quite ready to make that our focus point. But I was thinking I may look at some books and some other calligraphers for us to analyze. I'll let you all know. I would like to invite guests, hosts, but I don't have anybody in mind at the moment. So I will be thinking about that now that we're back into our calligraphic year. And if you have ideas, requests, please send them my way.
Okay.
All right, so with
Yep.
that,
Don't
everybody.
forget our prize.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, thank you. I have thank you, Lori. I have a wheel of names with all, everybody who was registered at early this morning. I created this, and it's all our members, and I'm gonna go ahead. It says click to spin. Ann Bystrom. So Ann Bystrom, you're our winner. Are you here still, Ann?
Oh, no,
Oh,
that
wait.
says,
Oh, it moved. Well, I'm sorry. It's Xian Chin. And she, I think, she's in another country. And so she'll be watching a recording. So we give her 1 week to respond. If she claims it, then we'll send it to her. And I'll just to show you the book, just a minute. When I get a response, I may just show pictures of several different ones. Let me stop share. Okay. So here's one. They're all different. And then it's got Veronica's
Brussels.
press and release.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love her press and release. And we have others in here that I had some specifically picked out. I don't know where the other one that I had specifically picked out, but here's one. I just
Yeah.
love her Romans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll wait and see if CN claims it. Otherwise, we may draw another name. Okay. Anything else? Okay, is that Margaret saying goodbye?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kristi.
All
Thank you,
right.
Kristi. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye, take
Thank
care
you.
all.
Very
Great
much.
information.
Thanks all for coming.
We appreciate you.
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
you do.
you.
Thank you, thank you.